to another vlog from Those Crazy Games. I'm glad to see you're still with us so far, so that's good. Like I said, this is all kind of experimental, so we'll be kind of adjusting things along the way, so definitely give us some feedback, and we'll kind of see how things go along the way, and that. Now, some of these vlogs, like this one, the last one I had scripted, and I had the prompter and all that, as you saw in the blooper thing that I introduced the channel with, because I wanted to have particular things said in that episode. Some of these, like this one, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to kind of speak extemporaneously because it's either background stuff or it's Q&A stuff. I'm not going to script all of those out precisely. And I do occasionally stutter, but usually when I'm on something like this, that doesn't quite hit. So, here's that. Now, this one, of course, is, where did the name come from? Those Crazy Games. And this takes me back a long time, but first I want to go through the other things that, the other possibilities that there were before I got to this one. I originally wanted to call this Dice Camera Action. That's because back in the early days of the podcast, I think it was like 2006 maybe, might have even been late 2005, co-host at the time Chris Heim and I did a commentary track, basically, for the Dungeons & Dragons movie from 2000. And that is sort of like the like a riff tracks kind of thing, where except instead of riffing on the movie, we were doing a commentary of our own on the thing from the perspective of someone who had seen the movie a few times, myself, and Chris, who had never seen it before. And it went over fairly well, and we always meant to go back and do that for other movies that had something to do with gaming as well. And I collected some DVDs of some other movies that we could do, and it never quite happened. We didn't really have time, and eventually he moved away, and so there we go. We could have still done them, I suppose, over Skype or something, but, you get really kind of iffy there sometimes. Timing and all. Yeah. But when I came up with the idea of doing this video show, that was the first name that I went to. And I went looking around on YouTube and saw that there was already a Dice Camera Action channel. I think it's a board game actual play channel. So you can go check that one out. And then I wanted to do screenplay. And this goes back to the podcast again. A friend of mine, Ken Fouché, he did a segment for the podcast for a while called Screenplay, where he would analyze a movie and take elements of it and show how you would use that towards gaming, kind of like an early blowing up the movies, if you kept up with the Feng Shui 2 Kickstarter, and you had if you were on that and you got the PDF at least of Blowing Up Hong Kong, and if you did not Blowing Up Hong Kong, that was a supplement from the original run, Blowing Up the Movies. And if you haven't seen that yet and you haven't picked that one up, Drive-Thru has it. It'll be an actual print soon, I'm sure. It was that kind of thing, though. And that was the next thing that I tried. And I asked him if it was alright if I used the name for that. He gave it his blessing. It was all good. And one of those little things, those bits of fate, I guess, happened. And Rooster Teeth, the guys that do Red vs. Blue, they were starting up a new movie podcast, and what do you know, they were calling it Screenplay. So, I couldn't really use that run now anymore. And, that's fully coincidental. I'm still a big fan of those guys. I'll still grumble once in a while, but, what can you do? Great minds think alike, right? And about that time I had a job change and was doing a lot of other stuff, and so the show had to go on hold. And it's good that it did, because it got me to the point that we're at now. So that's all good. But among other things, I needed a new name. And for this one, Those Crazy Games, that goes back to when I was a child in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, a small town not too far from here. I'm in Louisville right now, and I suppose Elizabethtown is really only a small town in comparison with Louisville. It's actually one of the larger towns in the state. It's not quite. It's smaller than Bowling Green, I think, or maybe not. I don't remember. It's fairly sizable. It has a mall. Okay, if it's capable of having a sign of urban blight like that, it's sizable. So, and don't go by the Elizabethtown movie to think that you know what the town is like, because it's really, while there's a lot of Kentucky in that movie, certainly, I think they did a lot of the filming in Versailles, I think. And yes, I am pronouncing it correctly. In Kentucky, it's Versailles. So, I'm getting off track. I was a kid in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and at that point, that was when the big arcade craze was happening. The first big video game revolution. And you had video arcades, or you had all the stand-up cabinets and some of the table things and whatever. You didn't really have a lot of the big sit-down things like you have now, especially not with 2 or more people. You might have the sit-down versions of some racing games like Pole Position or one of those. But yeah, that was the day. Back when Asteroids was a thing, back when Tempest was a thing, Space Invaders, Pac-Man. Those were the games. Defender. I think Tempest was probably my personal favorite of them all. But when I was that age, though, there was an arcade in Elizabethtown called Those Crazy Games. And I don't remember what brought that back to mind. But and this was even before I discovered Dungeons and Dragons and those things. Or at least before I had a chance to actually play Dungeons and Dragons. I'd heard of it through Dynamite Magazine. So, yay, whatever. But Those Crazy Games was a video arcade. You'd go in and you'd get your tokens, and I think they had some deal. It's like 5 tokens for $1 or something like that. A lot of places did that kind of thing back then. And they had a thing where you bring in your report card from school, and you'd get free tokens for however so many free tokens for an A or a B or whatever on your report card. And so I got to do that some. I didn't get to play video games nearly as much as I would have liked back then, honestly. But then again, that was kind of the nature of it, because you had the arcade cabinets. You were actually pumping quarters or tokens or whatever into these things. And as far as the home versions, go look up the Atari 2600 Pac-Man sometime. Some of the graphics for that. Okay. Even the Intellivision, which was probably the most high-tech game system at that time, and I didn't particularly like it the times I tried it, but even it didn't come close to the actual experience of the arcade games. And you didn't really start seeing those until you got into some of probably the 16-bit game systems, like the Sega Genesis. I mean, you play Street Fighter on a Sega Genesis, and it's almost exactly like the arcade Street Fighter, other than the controls, obviously, are a little bit different. You don't have the nice joystick and all the buttons, but you get the point. You get the point. It was a great little place. It had been a burger chef before that, and there's another throwback, especially in the southern region, as far as the whole cultural thing down here. Burger Chef was a big thing. I loved that stuff as a kid. I swear I did. And the arcade going in was enough to make me forgive it for taking over the same spot that the Burger Chef was. And it lasted a good few years. We ended up moving out of Elizabethtown around 83, 84, something like that. And I kind of lost track after that. I think it shut down shortly after that. There were a couple of other arcades that had come and gone, through there, through the later 80s and into the 90s, and of course once the consoles really started, especially once the PlayStation started, once the PlayStation hit, and whatever the same generation of the Nintendo was, and yeah, those were the big ones by then, Sega and Nintendo. By the time those systems hit, arcades were fairly well on their way out, and I don't. You'll still find the occasional one, I think, and you can buy the old cabinets even. I've had friends who turn them into using the MAME emulator to turn them into a big multi-game thing. Really, really cool stuff. But yeah, there's a little trip down memory lane here as far as those crazy games. I don't know what brought the old arcade to mind, but I realized that the name was pretty catchy, and it seemed perfect for this thing, and I kept quiet about the name, because I kept on saying on All Games Considered, whenever I would talk about Screenplay, I would say, yeah, it's going to be called Screenplay, and we're doing blah-de-blah-de-blah, and of course, there you go. So I kept quiet about those crazy games until I had a few things recorded and in the can and ready to post. And then I dropped the names somewhere or other. I don't even remember where, but it's out there. And now it's out here and you guys are watching it. I have no idea if you guys even wanted to know the history of that, but there it is. Now, I mentioned the possibility of doing some Q&A things for some of these alternate week vlogs. If you've got some questions, there's an email address in the credits still, knockmeister@gmail.com. You can drop me a line there. Leave stuff in the comments here or in the videos and that, and I'll eventually come through and do sort of Q&As based on some of those. Like I said, just keep on giving me your feedback. If you like what you've seen so far, go ahead and tell your friends. Have them take a look, spread the word, and hopefully this goes somewhere. So that's that for now. This has been Those Crazy Games. Next week, it's more media stuff, so stay tuned and keep rolling crits.